Gone. Gone. That's what they didn't expect. Not rage, not resistance, just gone. They talked about loyalty like it was a currency, something you earn, trade, demand. But I never asked for belonging. I never needed their approval, their praise, their pretend concern. I was there because I chose to be, until I chose not to be. They didn't notice at first, thought I was just tired, distracted, quiet. They mistook absence for disengagement, but absence, real absence, isn't a fade. It's a fracture. I didn't drift away. I disconnected. Completely, silently, not out of anger, not even pain, just necessity. They asked where I went, what changed, as if the shift had happened overnight. But the truth is, I was gone long before I walked away. They never saw it because they only looked when they needed something. When I was useful, predictable, loyal. But Monster doesn't stay loyal. Monster stays silent. And when silence is met with pressure, it becomes exit. They had their rules, their orders, their rituals of inclusion, and I played along until the game lost meaning, until I looked around and saw walls where they saw community, chains where they saw unity. I wasn't part of them, I was surrounded by them, and that's not the same. Leaving wasn't rebellion, it wasn't a statement, it was subtraction. I subtracted myself from their equation and watched the math fall apart. They asked for loyalty, I gave them absence, and they finally realized which one was louder. Wait doesn't shout, it just sinks. That's what I became when I left. Not noise, weight. They still talked like I was listening, still left room for me in the structure, still expected I might return, as if absence was just a phase. But they didn't understand. I didn't walk out. I evaporated, slowly, without mess, without trace, and once you've left like that, there's no door left to come back through. They began adjusting without saying it, covered the space I used to fill, divided responsibilities, shifted tones. They said I was quiet. I wasn't. I was saturated with all the things I never said. And when silence hits saturation, it spills, not in words, but in disappearance. I never asked them to understand. I just needed them to notice. They didn't. Now they notice the whole, but not the shape that used to fill it. When? They keep asking that. When did I start pulling away? When did I leave? They never noticed that I'd been leaving while still sitting right in front of them. Absence doesn't always look like distance. Sometimes it looks like someone listening without reacting, nodding without agreeing, contributing without attaching. That was me long before I disappeared. I was already emptying the space around me, one moment at a time. They thought loyalty meant endurance, showing up, playing along. But loyalty without alignment is slow erosion, and erosion doesn't scream. It just keeps happening quietly, consistently, until the ground beneath them wasn't ground anymore. I left long before they realized there was a decision to make. That's the difference. They see choice as moment. I see it as momentum. I didn't explode. I dissolved. They don't know when. They just know it's already done. Some of them say I ghosted. Some say I burned bridges. But Monster doesn't burn bridges. Monster waits until there's no bridge left to stand on, and then steps away without sound. They'll keep searching for signs, replaying conversations, looking for what they missed. But the truth is simple. You can't fix what never belonged to you in the first place. Silence isn't neutral, it's directional, and mine pointed away from them long before I moved. They kept speaking as if volume could summon loyalty, as if the right tone, the right phrasing could reverse a collapse that had already finished. I listened, not out of care, not out of hope, out of final confirmation. I wanted to hear what they sounded like when the illusion cracked. It wasn't betrayal, it was clarity. I had given what I could. Then I gave nothing. They never noticed what it cost to stay, what it took to show up without expectation, without demand, without needing recognition. But even absence has a threshold, and once that threshold breaks, what leaves is not anger, it's detachment. They said I should have explained, given context, outlined my reasons. But absence doesn't owe explanation. It speaks for itself in the empty space it leaves behind. And that space now echoes louder than all their requests ever did. I didn't slam the door. I didn't erase history. I just left the room without touching anything. And still, everything felt disrupted, because the stillest exits leave the deepest dents. They looked for drama. What they got was silence shaped like a decision they can't undo. They replay what they said, trying to find the moment they lost me. But it wasn't a moment. It was a build-up they ignored. My quiet wasn't sudden. It was accumulated, compacted, pressurized by neglect, and like anything held too long, it eventually vanished into something they couldn't reach. I wasn't broken. I was full enough to walk away without needing anyone to understand why. Missing, not me, direction. That's what they felt when I was gone, not the loss of a person, the loss of the pattern I used to complete. They tried to carry on, filled the space, assigned the roles, kept the meetings going, but rhythm without resonance is just motion, and the motion they created didn't lead anywhere. It looped. Because what I took with me wasn't effort, it was gravity. No one said it, but the air changed. Their voices lowered, the sentences got shorter, like they were bracing against something they didn't want to name, like they sensed that the system had been patched but not repaired, and that absence wasn't the gap, it was the proof. They didn't need me to work, they needed me to care, and that's what I stopped giving. Not loudly, not spitefully, just completely. The cold kind of absence, the one that doesn't hope for return, the one that teaches you how replaceable you were to others and how essential you became by leaving. They weren't mourning me, they were mourning certainty. Because I never announced my exit, I just stopped arriving. And when someone leaves without noise, you don't even know when to grieve. You just keep waiting until waiting becomes denial. And if you understand that, if this silence makes sense to you more than their noise ever did, then maybe you've already left somewhere too. You just haven't walked out yet. Subscribe, not to belong, to remember that absence doesn't always mean lost. Sometimes it means found. Echoes, that's all they have now. Not conversation, not connection, just noise bouncing off walls I'm no longer standing between. They think this is personal, that I walked out to make a point, but Monster doesn't prove things. Monster simply stops participating. That's what they can't accept, that I didn't leave with noise. I just became a silence loud enough to rearrange them. Now they avoid the seat I used to sit in. It stays empty, not reserved, not sacred, just untouchable, because filling it would mean acknowledging that I was never supposed to stay, that I endured and that endurance was mistaken for loyalty. I didn't abandon them. I removed myself from a role they wrote for me without asking, and now, without the part I never agreed to play, the scene doesn't land, the script doesn't hold. The room feels thinner and the air heavier. The story, they needed one. Not for me, for themselves. Because admitting I was never really with them would collapse their whole narrative. So they built one. They said I changed, that I grew cold, that maybe I was tired or bitter or going through something. It comforted them to see my absence as a flaw, not a decision, because choices threaten them, but flaws they can fix or at least pity. They forgot I was always like this, not loud, not soft, just present until I wasn't. Their version of me wore a mask of exhaustion. Mine didn't wear anything at all. That's the problem. When you show up as is, they think you're in costume, and when you leave, they mourn the version of you they invented to feel safe. Now, they whisper about closure. They want one last message, one final sentence to hold on to, but I left no pieces. I took them all with me. Absence isn't about leaving crumbs. It's about removing the table altogether. They can't replicate what I was because I wasn't a role. I was the resistance against the noise, the invisible center, the contradiction they didn't know was keeping everything balanced. And now that I'm gone, it's not falling, it's freezing. I didn't go silent. I became the silence they keep trying to speak into, and nothing's answering back. They kept going, or at least pretended to. Their system functioned. Messages were sent. Tasks were completed. Schedules were followed. But it all felt off, mechanical, hollow. The cadence had changed. It wasn't about presence anymore. It was about covering a gap they didn't want to name. They called it streamlining, restructuring, but in truth it was a quiet scramble to reassign my absence. You can't replace gravity, but they tried to. And every attempt revealed how much of their cohesion had depended on something unspoken. Me, staying without needing to stay. Now that I was gone, they spoke less, listened less, trusted less. It wasn't fear, it was uncertainty in its rawest form. I had made things predictable by simply being there, unmoved, and now even silence didn't feel stable to them. It felt like a warning. Some of them tried to mirror what I had been. Calm, quiet, detached, but it was performative, a weak echo. You can't imitate absence. It either is or it isn't. And what I left behind wasn't just a vacancy. It was the weight of someone who didn't break, didn't shout, didn't explain. I left by disappearing without damage, and somehow that did more damage than if I had burned the place down, because destruction has intention, but silence has memory. It stays, it lingers, and it turns every sound that follows into proof of something missing. They don't talk about it anymore, not openly, not directly. My name doesn't come up, my absence doesn't get mentioned, but it lives in every adjustment they make, every small change in tone, every hesitation before speaking. I'm not a ghost. I'm not haunting them. I'm just proof that something they thought would always stay didn't. That kind of silence doesn't leave. It just sinks deeper, becomes part of the walls, part of the rhythm, a new law. What was once here is no longer owed. They tried to define it, tried to package the moment I left into something they could study. But you can't analyze what didn't rupture. You can't dissect what vanished without bleeding. I wasn't a break in the pattern. I was the last solid part of it, removed. And once I was gone, the rest dissolved into motion without meaning. Now they work harder to seem unaffected. More smiles, more plans, more noise. But none of it reaches the depth I vacated, because that space isn't empty. It's occupied by the absence itself. And absence has memory. It reminds, it weighs, it outlasts everything superficial. I never demanded anything, never shouted, never explained. I just withheld, until withholding became silence, and silence became distance, and distance became the reason no one feels whole anymore. This wasn't revenge, this wasn't bitterness, this was a decision without drama, and that's what makes it final. You asked for loyalty, I gave you absence, and now absence is all that